Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. Tonight we'll be discussing not a single film or franchise, but instead the birth of a subgenre, that most disreputable class of horror known as the slasher, which had its origins in the 1960s and 70s, but really came into full flower at the very beginning of the decade, thanks in no small part to a certain film about a family called Voorhees. That said, between January and December 1980, no fewer than 15 to 20 films were released that could be considered slashers, from the hallowed Hollywood Hills to the dingiest back alleys of New York to the high schools of Canada. Join us as we celebrate the slashers of 1980. We're talking stalking and slashing, and we have an amazing panel to chat about it with me. Let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Fraser Coffeen.
Hi there, glad to be here.
Adam Rockoff.
Thanks for watching.
Amanda Reyes.
Hello.
Art Ettinger.
Hey.
And Freddie Young.
Hey there, you're all doomed.
And we're going to be chatting about slashers in 1980, and that means we're going to be covering about a dozen films, so I will not bother to create banners for all of them. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome. This is, I normally pride myself on the fact the aesthetic of the show is having casual horror fans alongside folks who have taken their passions a little bit further, but we really do have an all-star cast today, so thank you all for joining us. We got Fraser from Creepy History. We've got Adam Rockoff, who wrote the book Going to Pieces, The Rise and Fall of the Slasher Film. We've got Amanda Reyes from Made for TV Mayhem, but also who seems to be appearing on every single commentary track I listen to these days. Art Ettinger of Ultraviolent Magazine. And then Freddie Young of Full Moon Reviews. So we really, I'm super excited and looking forward to having this conversation. This is an unusual one because we're not talking about a film or a franchise, but really kind of an entire subgenre. And I guess the first thing we would be doing if we're going to be talking about slashers is what maketh a slasher? Would anybody like to take a, wait for it, stab at that?
I'll talk a little bit about it. I mean, they have different elements, and maybe I'll go into the academic side that I like. But there's lots of elements to it. I think people think of blood and guts. Stalk scenes are really important in slasher films. The killer doesn't need to be masked, but it's helpful. They can tend to be somewhat enigmatic. I mean, these are all very gray areas because everybody kind of puts their own spin on it. But that kind of like Michael Myers' Unstoppable, he kills just 'cause. They have a really interesting aesthetic. They tend to be largely white, middle-class kids. There's a lot of theorizing on like the suburban horrors. Colleges are my favorite, college set slashers, and then in the suburban homes. My one of my favorite aspects about the slasher film is actually the nonviolent content in it. I really like the female friendships, like you would see in something like Killer Party or Sorority House Massacre, where you see a lot of different kinds of women interacting with each other and having very strong bonds. The final girl, of course, is really important. That's another element that you have generally, with the few exceptions like the burning, you usually have a female survivor who starts off as somewhat virginal, maybe a little pent up, who sort of has the only arc in the film, and kind of grows into something that ends up being kind of formidable for the killer. And she usually ends up on top at the end. And those are some of the elements that just come to the top of my mind when I think about slashers. But in general, I think when people think of them, they think of like the creative kills and the violence and the stalking, I think, are the most important elements.
Thank you, Amanda. Anybody want to add to that?
I also say kind of like a morality play, 'cause like drugs are bad. Get you killed. Sex will get you killed.
Yep.
Most of these films do that. So
I kind of think that there's, in addition to slasher films proper, there's also just slasher era films, movies that came out during the peak of the stalk and slash cycle that maybe have some slasher elements to them, but aren't pure slasher films. Something like Mother's Day, which is on your list.
Yep.
Which I think, I'm not one. I always hate when people say something's not a horror movie, so I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say that something's not a slasher movie. But we do have sort of a marketing technique in this time period where movies that maybe aren't slasher movies are kind of marketed as such. Maybe a famous example would be when people actually first started seeing I Spit on Your Grave was in 1980, having its first marketing campaign totally failed, with the new one making it look sort of like a slasher movie.
It's interesting. I agree with all of that. And Amanda, you said it so very well. So I don't have a lot to add there. But I think what's interesting and what I really am excited to talk about with this particular panel, and I don't know if this is why you chose 1980 in particular as the year, is that I agree with all of what you just said. And it's not fully there yet in these ones that we watched.
Yeah.
We're in this interesting like Halloween to Friday the 13th gap, which is, the elements have been established by Halloween and many others. But it does feel a little bit like Friday the 13th is the one that really was like, all right, this is it. This is what we're doing. Everybody get on board the train, and really dug into a lot of what Amanda, you laid out. So I agree with all of that definition. And it was a lot of fun watching these in that context and seeing like, oh, we're not quite there on all of these just yet.
Fraser just encapsulated something perfectly that I was thinking of as I was watching and rewatching these films. And that is, there are so many of them, especially the lesser known ones like Funeral Home and Schizoid, that if you watch them, I guess, artistically, they really harken back to more of a 1970s exploitation feel, more than what we would call a traditional slasher, which was interesting to see.
And that's kind of why I did pick 1980, because it does feel like the slasher is being born. I mean, Friday the 13th coming out in May of that year really, as you said, Fraser, kind of solidified it, and it made it really bankable. I think Halloween, because of the supernatural leanings, people hadn't quite landed on it yet. When you're making an independent film, if you found, I just need to obscure a killer, have some creative kills, and we're off to the races. And so suddenly 1980s, when we start seeing that happen more and more and more, we had, like I say, about a dozen films that can be classified as slashers. But like you, Art, I was watching them and I'm going, I don't know if this is what I would call a slasher. I can see how somebody might. And kind of the list was culled from various sources on the internet that are going, these are various slashers. I even texted Adam at one point, and we were talking about The Boogeyman, Yuli Lamel's film. And I'm like, that gets called a slasher by some folks, but it's really more of kind of like a supernatural force as opposed to an individual running around stabbing people, which is what we usually associate as a slasher.
I was thinking about that movie recently, and the kids on the beach seemed like full-blown slasher to me. But you're right. I mean, it's a kind of a hybrid of stuff. Those are like my favorites, though, like something like The Slayer. Like these supernatural movies are so wild and creative. I really like them.
Well, and yeah, and that's sort of what I meant when I was referring to sort of a slasher era movie. I mean, The Boogeyman is exactly that, right? One of the things going on in this time period too, and I don't want us to go off course before we begin, but you definitely have, as you have in exploitation trends, you have this slasher trend going on. But the prominence of Canada and the tax shelter era of filmmaking in Canada cannot be ignored, right? I mean, just in 1980 alone, you have Prom Night, Funeral Home, and Terror Train, and Black Christmas, of course. That was sort of Canada's Halloween, and while it may not have been a successful film in the States, it was in Canada, or it was more successful, we should say. So there's lots of different things going on in 1980 that I think result in this boom of product.
And again, it didn't just spring fully formed. A lot of people talk about Halloween and Black Christmas kind of being the origins of the slasher, but of course, there's a big, long history leading up to it of, from the Italian Gialli.
Right.
Texas Chainsaw is not a slasher, but it often gets lumped in as a slasher. Toolbox Murders, Town That Dreaded Sundown, The Redeemer, the Pete Walker films from the UK. All of that leads up to Halloween.
Even Psycho, the original Psycho.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which we just talked about recently. And, Psycho 2 was born of the slasher boom,
Right.
which was created by, Psycho. Between Halloween and 1980, we had some interesting ones, like When a Stranger Calls, Tourist Trap, Driller Killer, The Silent Scream. Those are all landing in that kind of 1979 year. And then we lean forward into 1980. And I feel like the slasher finally finds its footing. We start in this 1980, we start seeing some of the tropes showing up and going, hey, that works. We can do that too.
One of the pieces that I was thinking along those lines, Adam brought up Schizoid before. And it's interesting you mentioned the Giallo, because the one that felt the most to me. He's got the gloves. It's very Giallo, right? And so I was trying to think about the different, what is the difference between those two? What kind of draws the line there? And to your point of those pieces coming together, the one aspect I noticed throughout watching these was kind of the disappearance sort of the adult, whether crime aspect of it, right? There's, by the time Friday the 13th really established, there's not adults in that. There's the one cop who's ridiculed. It's very firmly focused on the kids. We've gotten rid of the crime aspect, the cop aspect. Even Halloween has a little bit of the cop, but also Loomis is sort of playing that role, doing that kind of, serving that purpose. And I think if you look ahead and if we were to do this again, and talk about the 1981s and, Burning and Prowler and all My Bloody Valentine and all that stuff, there's definitely an absence of that aspect of it. We've leaned more into just hanging out with the kids and seeing what's going on with them and transcending that detective aspect.
There was kind of a return of the adult theme slasher in 1982, and I actually presented a paper on it. Now I'm trying to remember all the titles, but it was stuff like Ghost Dance, Visiting Hours is a good one, and there's a handful of The Forest. I can't remember if that was 82 or not, but that's a really interesting one. I found those to be really compelling. The Slayer would be another one. Wes Craven, kind of when he did Nightmare on Elm Street, that's when people started really thinking about the themes that were available in slashers, sort of academically. And because of stuff that he did about the domestic space and Freddy Krueger invading it and the families killing this guy and the alcoholism, all this stuff. And it was kind of really interesting. And somebody wrote a paper, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but they talk about how all these kids felt like they were let down by the adult figures, and these films are like a rebellion against them. But when you read her paper, you can actually translate the adult theme slashers you saw later as them feeling just as helpless, but in the adult position. So for me, as an older person now, I find that those films are really compelling and they endure for me because now I relate to the characters in The Slayer who are career people who, are dealing with adult issues like a bad marriage, you know what I mean? And there's a scene in The Forest that's so fascinating because it's at the beginning and it's before they go camping, and you see these two guys in a car talking about getting off work. It's 5 p.m. and there's this great overhead shot of the freeway, and they're in 5 p.m. traffic. And it really, you relate to that as you get older as a thing, and it does nothing to do with the horror in the film, but I find that those characters end up becoming relatable, and I love the teen slashers. Don't get me wrong, I watched them over and over, but the adult ones have really grown with me. The adult figures went away. It was sort of like Charlie Brown, right? Like everything was just these kids. I was like, wah, 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 and they were just dead air that were just in the background. But there was like a return of them, which I also found really fascinating. And I find that those films are like amazing.
And all of us on this panel are, I would guess, slasher fans. And so I'd like to kind of talk about, like, what is it about these films that appeals? What is it, do you think, that really resonates for horror fans?
I think some of them are, I guess they're more grounded than usual horror films. Like, it's not supernatural most of the time. Like a Halloween is like Michael might be a guy on your street that you don't even know will be killing people. I think something like, Prom Night, where it's a revenge tale about a guy who sees the murder of a girl in the past, and he's getting revenge on these people that killed a girl, and that can happen in real life. Like serial killers, that's a real thing. True crime. That's people are very addicted to that, and people are just fascinated by that, by murder and violence. I guess. I guess that's why people resonate with that.
I think, to be honest, and I'm not trying to be funny, when I started watching these films and fell in love with them, it was for the TNA and the violence. I mean, that's the God's honest truth. As as a preteen boy, to see these lavish posters, and then to read the little blurbs about them, I couldn't imagine. Anything more exciting. And when Amanda was talking about appreciating these films at different stages in her life, just real quick, watching Friday the 13th, I distinctly remember as a 10-year-old kid watching it before there was any violence, or before there was a lot of violence, and there's a strip poker scene. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, I can't wait to grow up, because this is what adults do. They sit around and they smoke and they play strip poker. And now watching it as a 50-something man, they look like little kids, and you feel almost creepy watching it. So it's I don't know what the point of all that was, but it was very interesting. And real quick, I don't want to monopolize this, but I just want to say one other thing about why I like them. What's interesting, and I don't know why, the ones that I really love and come back to are the most formulaic. And I think as fans of cinema, all of us, would usually say, oh, we always want to see something new. We always want to see something unique. But with slasher films, it's the ones that are most formulaic, and the ones that really stick to the classic slasher structure that I really, enjoy the most. I mean, I've seen, Aaron, we were talking a little bit, I've seen Terror Train 100 times. I could see it 100 more. If I never see Schizoid again, to the day I die, I'd be more than happy. So why that is, I don't know, but there's something about the formula that's comforting and enjoyable for sure.
I'll piggyback off of what Adam said there about the formula. I agree that there's kind of the two phases, right? As a kid, totally right. And then as an adult, right, there's that different aspect that I agree. It's the execution of the formula. We talked about this a little bit when we did the episode on Final Chapter last year. To me, it's that execution of the formula. And in particular, then, it's those moments within the formula where something different happens, something pops, right? Where the filmmaker takes the formula and just, has this moment where it just kind of bursts through. To me, maybe the best moment of everything, I rewatched like all of these, during the past month or so. And maybe the crowning moment to me in all of them is the moment that Jamie Lee Curtis starts to dance in Prom Night, right? And the song kicks in and the dance starts. And it's just this incredible moment, because that one is pretty formulaic, right? That one really does deliver on what it's supposed to do. It's all set up. But then it just has this moment where it's like, okay, we've been in the box just for a minute. We're just going to kind of open the doors and go a little bit berserk here. And then we'll go back in the box. And I love that. I think those kinds of things are absolutely great.
And Art, you and I have talked about a couple of, you've been on the show a couple of times, talking about some more extreme forms of horror. What is it about slashers that appeal to you?
I stopped trying to psychoanalyze myself a long time ago. I am an extremely nonviolent person. I've never been in a fight in my life. I love extreme cinema, and the horror movies that I gravitated to at a young age were the really mean-spirited ones that I could get my hands on. Now, this was the 80s, so we're talking what you could rent at your local video store, but when I saw Last House on the Left and I Spit on Your Grave, like, those grabbed me, even as a young kid. But slasher movies also grabbed me at a young age, and I think it really just had to do mainly with the age I am and the era that I came up in. I mean, I was born in 1975, and I remember in the second grade on our main UHF station in Buffalo, New York, Channel 29, February 18th, 83 is when Madman opened in my hometown of Buffalo. And for some reason, they had just this insane amount of TV advertising on Channel 29 for Madman. And I would see these commercials for this movie. And I just remember as like a young child just being absolutely like fascinated. And like, I could not wait to see this thing. No one in my family likes horror movies, so I was kind of on my own. We got cable in the third grade, and I would just sort of start seeing these things as I could. I was allowed to watch whatever I wanted, but I didn't really have anybody to guide me through that. So third grade was our first time getting cable, and then fifth grade was when we first got a VCR, which blew everything wide open. And so the first slasher movie I remember seeing from start to finish was the television version of Halloween 2. And I was amazed. I was completely and totally enthralled with it. I've never been scared by horror movies. I'm just fascinated by them. I enjoy them. They thrill me. I don't have nightmares from them. I never did, not even as a child. And so there was that movie just grabbed me. And then I saw Friday the 13th Part 5 while my family was watching the Super Bowl, one of the most magnificent films of any genre. I stand by that movie as high art. And immediately after they showed Friday the 13th Part 5, they had a week of Fridays on the movie channel. They showed parts 1 through 5, which I recorded, and I watched them over and over and over again. And there was just something about the whole formula, the music, the dumb teenagers, the violence, and it just excited the hell out of me. And I think it really just has a lot to do with where and when I came up in horror. If I was a monster kid in the 50s, maybe I'd have a different perspective. But there is something timeless about these movies. I mean, kids today watch these movies, and of course, we had a big slasher resurgence later on. I don't know. I stopped trying to psychoanalyze myself. All I know is that this was something that was instantly likable to me. This was not an acquired taste, you know. There are types of movies that I had to grow into. This is not one of them. It was, you know, you show me a slasher movie as a child. And what's interesting when I go back and watch them now, most of my opinions from when I first saw them like are the same opinions I have when I rewatch them. Some of these movies are better than I remembered, but most of the time, if I thought a movie was slow as a kid, I still think it's slow now. And my rankings of like the main franchise movies are like almost identical to what they would have been when I was 10 years old.
And Amanda, you kind of give us a nice kind of high level appreciation of what the slashers are. What is it about like that kind of hit you on a gut level? What do you like about it in that emotional way?
I'm definitely with Adam. When I was younger, I was like, these people were like 7 years older than me, and it was like, this is what's going to happen when I'm like an older teenager. I'm going to be like almost an adult, and I'm going to be doing adult-like things with like peer groups, and I really like the idea of like all these people having these fun parties and sexy stuff happened and stuff, and then I also like to be scared. I was terrified. The first horror or slasher film that I can remember seeing was Halloween. My friend down the street had a VCR and it came on HBO, and he taped it, and we watched it like one afternoon, and I was up for 2 nights straight, and my dad had to actually sit with me and read like Tom and Jerry comics till I went to bed because I was so scared. And then I saw Friday the 13th, which I only watched half of, and I was too scared to finish it. And then I didn't really watch them too much after that. I saw a few, like I remember watching Funhouse like at 1 in the morning when I was like 13 on the local channel, but it wasn't that often. And then when I became like an older teenager, I started to see myself in the films, and they were still really scary, but then they became more fun, you know. But also by like the mid 80s, when I was a teenager, we had the cartoonier slashers, so like Nightmare on Elm Street 4, which is my favorite. I'm trying to think of the other ones. Jason Takes Manhattan, you know, which is a great one. So like they got sillier, and they were sort of easier to watch. But it wasn't until actually I saw Maniac, and I was in my very early 20s, and I rented it, and I was still living at home, and my parents were out of town, and I put it on like at midnight, and I got all the way up to where Tom Savini blew open his head, And I was like, I can't do this. This is too freaky.
No
I
mas.
just can't. And I put it away and I thought I'll watch it the next day. I'll finish it. And then I was like, it can't be any scarier than what I just saw. And then it has that infamous nurse scene, in the subway train, which is like the scariest thing I've ever seen. And I was like, I love the way this film makes me feel. Like I've never felt this before. And it was kind of exciting, I guess. And then I rented every horror movie. I worked at a video store at that time and I just rented everything that they had. And so it kind of came later in life, but I think it was exactly what Adam said. It was just, they were fun. And it was like watching the person you thought you were going to be. You thought your life was going to be way crazier, exciting, right? And have all this adventure and stuff. And also like the settings. I like the college campus stuff a lot because I didn't go to college till I was much older, so I was really attracted to those films too, because I like to look at what these people were doing in college. So I don't know, at a gut level, yeah, they scare me. They still do sometimes,
We're going to be doing a deeper dive on Maniac later on this year as it's celebrating its 45th anniversary, as all of these films are. Let's kick things off with a little discussion about Friday the 13th, 1980. And then I want to talk about just 3 films that preceded it and then kind of the onslaught of things that followed it. Friday the 13th, as you said, Fraser, it starts to kind of get the beats down in a way that can be recreated and that really had a mass appeal to it.
You can see, I think, when you watch all of these together, because it was interesting really watching these as like a set of 1980 movies. I've seen not quite all of them, but many of them in the past, but I've never really thought of them as one unit of like 1980 films. And watching them in that context, yeah, I can totally see why Friday the 13th is the one that kind of became the one ring to rule them all, as opposed to like Christmas Evil, right? Like there's not 8 franchise movies and following that one, not that there shouldn't be all the exploits as he travels off into the sky and see what's
in his van.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's like you said, it's recreatable. It's also just, I mean, I could talk about Friday the 13th a ton. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of this one, but for all the talk that, the criticism that it got, and maybe it got more criticism because it became more, widely known and things like that, but it is really well done. Some of the shots of just like the lake are just really beautiful. I was really struck by that this time in particular, of like, oh, this is just like really, there's just like good cinematography going on here, right? And obviously you've got the good effects from Savini and the good kills and things like that. You've got a lot of interesting things going on. They'd already played a bit in Halloween and especially in Peeping Tom and in Black Christmas with the killer's point of view aspect, but they really dig into that here. And Cunningham has some really cool tricks that he does around that. It is often thought of, right, by those who are not into the genre as this sort of nadir, but there's also a lot of really sort of sneakily technical stuff going on in it that is super well done. And of course, obviously, not everybody picks up on those, and so you get some kind of junky ones that follow. But more people did pick up on them than you think.
Well, and I think, the professionalism that you're alluding to, that was something that mainstream audiences could connect to.
Right.
They weren't used to the 42nd Street, grindhouse stuff that kind of like Don't Answer the Phone, is leaning into. This felt very polished. It felt like, oh, this is a movie. This isn't like something that's going to ask a lot of me.
Yeah, even though in that professionalism, that's a good way to say it, even though it's got the violent kills and things like that, it has moved away from the sort of meanness that existed in some of the 70s ones, right? Like man, you said like Maniac, that's a mean movie, right? That movie is not here to be your friend in any way. And I agree, Don't Answer the Phone, same. There's a bunch of them that are like that. Nightmares, I thought was a little on the mean-spirited side. Friday the 13th is leaning into the fun, right? And that's what allows it to hit that mainstream.
Can I jump in and say one thing really quick? Because we're talking about the professionalism, and this is one of the things that really struck me watching these films again. That it suddenly became crystal clear to me that horror fans and slasher fans in particular are fantastic critics. And what I mean by that is we elevated the best of this subgenre correctly. There's a reason when we talk about the best of the best, it's Friday the 13th, it's Halloween, it's Black Christmas, and then it's Prom Night, it's Terror Train, it's Bloody Valentine, Happy Birthday to Me. Objectively, when you watch all these films together, we didn't make any mistakes. Funeral Home is not better by any stretch than My Bloody Valentine. The films that really, that we would put in the pantheon of slasher films are the best of the genre, and I don't really think there's any question about it. I mean, we all have our ones that we, the Bastard Children that we like better than others, but in the rankings, the Mount Rushmore of slasher films, we're all pretty much going to agree on the same ones.
I agree with that. I think it looks like it's very a mainstream movie, right? It's very professional. The special effects are out there. I'm sure a lot of people at the time were like very shocked by like that arrow scene through the neck, Kevin Bacon, a lot of the kills. The mystery is actually interesting. You don't know who the killer is. And then the performances are really good. Like, Bessie Palmer at that finale is just amazing. And I think that's why that film still holds up, because you understand her character. She's not there very long, but you understand why she's doing the things she's doing and who she is and who Jason is. You don't see Jason to the very end, but we know who the character is just by her performance. So I think that's why that film still holds up. I think that's why the franchise is held up in a very high platform, because it was started here. It was a very detailed story, and you can understand why the sequels that came out of it make sense. So I think that's why Friday the 13th is such an important horror movie period. I think this really changed horror drastically for the 80s. And until like Nightmare on Elm Street came along and changed that again. Then Child's Play changed that, then Scream, all these movies changed the genre. And I think Friday the 13th was really the one that really knocked it out of the park.
I agree with everything everybody's been saying. It's really atmospheric, and I watched it once on TV with the violence all edited out, and I was really amazed by how beautiful the film looked and how it's got a lot of ambiance. The one character that talks about the dream about it raining blood, like that's such a amazing moment in the film. It's probably my favorite. And also to go with Freddie, what he said, I think the film benefited by having somebody like Betsy Palmer, who actually created a backstory for herself as well, and the character. And so she came in like as a very well-trained actress with a lot of like stuff in her head that she was able to like express to the audience, and did a very good job of it. And also it has a great, like, the legend of Jason in it of itself being built in that film was so amazing. I mean, it's unforgettable, even if they never made another film, you'd always remember Jason if you saw it. So I think it does a lot of things really well, surprisingly well, considering I think probably, I'm guessing, I don't know much about it, but I'm guessing when the critics originally saw it, they probably thought it was awful, but it has all these things that they just weren't looking at, and that's unfortunate, but it stood the test of time for sure.
Well, I think there are so many effective moments throughout that film. I mean, starting, a lot of the things you talked about, the performances, but I mean, that final jump scare is amazing. It still works. I watched it with a crowd recently, and it was like, wow, like people still jump when that happens. And that's pretty amazing for a movie that's, 45 years old.
I think that it's sometimes overlooked just how brilliant Sean Cunningham is. I think when people think about Last House on the Left, they focus on Wes Craven's academic background, but anyone who's ever spoken to Sean Cunningham knows he's hyper intelligent, which is not to dog other filmmakers. That is not always the case with filmmakers, musicians, or insert whatever type of artist here. He is hyper intelligent, and Last House on the Left was not some underground little movie. I've been delving deep in researching on my own a lot of history of how long movies played, particularly in my hometown, because that is of special interest to me. Last House on the Left played at midnight for 15 years. That is not a underground small movie. That is a movie that had a huge impact, and it got a lot of press in its time for being very, very successful. And he knew what he was doing when he came up with the title, the image of Friday the 13th going through broken glass, and then the film itself arguably had a bigger impact than Halloween, in as much as the summer camp slasher movie became a subset of slasher movies in and of itself, right? What an experience the first time you see it is, and then again, the first time you see it with an audience, as you've said. I remember in high school, I was 5 years old when the movie first came out, so I didn't see it till I was 10 on cable. But then when I was a junior or senior in high school, I got to see a 35 millimeter midnight screening of it. And for some reason, it was the Warner Brothers overseas print with the extra gore, which was super cool.
Oh, wow.
It was a beat up print. And the theater did this stupid thing where they would have like, people dressed up as Leatherface and stuff jumping. It's like, that was annoying. But seeing the movie with an audience, it's an unparalleled experience. I mean, people do jump. It really did set the stage for what was to follow in the 80s big time. And it's one of the most influential movies of all time of any genre.
Well, and kind of going back to what Fraser was saying, I had never watched all of these movies this close together or under the umbrella of slashers. I had seen most of these before as well. But again, it was kind of like piecemeal. And to see them all together, I was amazed at how we oftentimes hear people painting slasher with a brush. It's like, this is a slasher. And if we're looking at all of these as slashers, there are so many different versions of a slasher in 1980 for sure. We have, the dark and gritty. We have the light and poppy. We have the younger. We have the older. We start to see a couple of the revenge tropes start to play through a couple times.
There is a great benefit in focusing on a subset of movies all at once. It can also be really detrimental to one's memory. Like, I went through periods of time when I would get obsessed with certain subgenres of exploitation movies, and I would watch like all of them at once. And then you get confused as to what movie's what, like I watched Nazi exploitation movies for like 2 months, and then I watched black exploitation movies, and then I watched Mexican horror movies, and then I watched giallo. And then sometimes, like when we were watching He Knows You're Alone the other night, I said to Alana, I'm like, I didn't know that this scene was in this movie. I don't know what movie I thought it was in, but I just, that's in He Knows You're Alone. I love that scene, So it's just like, because I watched He Knows You're Alone when I got into slasher movies, and I rented 18 of them in a month. So that can be cool, but then it can also be like, wait a minute, like
the blur is real.
And then you can also chase the dragon, right? Like if you fuck up and you watch The Untold Story as your first Category 3 movie, as I did, then you sit through all this other garbage, and you're like, oh man, none of this is
never gonna get to Untold Story again.
Yeah, you want to see the Candy Tangerine Man near the end of your exploitation of black exploitation. If you watch it first, you're gonna be sad because there's no other Candy Tangerine Man. But I didn't mean to get us.
No. Well, thank you, because kind of as we go back to the beginning, like the first, I'm going to kind of go in order of release dates, which for anybody out there with their finger on the internet. These are coming from Wikipedia and IMDb, so don't tack me up on the cross. I didn't do it. We're going to kick things off with To All a Good Night, which was came out in January of 1980, which is, kind of missing the boat. I'm like, that's a terrible release date. It was directed by David Hess of Last House on the Left fame. And what were people's thoughts on To All Good Night?
Well, my copy's autographed by David Hess.
And nice.
I met him at a convention. He was terrifying. He was real nice, but Last House on the Left is in my head, right? And I had him sign the movie, and I said something like, "I love this movie," and he just looked at me and he said, "You do?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I don't know what I said." And I cherish that copy. I love It's All a Good Night. So I'm going to be the one that actually cheerleads all the underdog films. I really like the low end horror. I love regional horror in particular. I love shot on video horror. It's All a Good Night is ridiculously fun. And I did a podcast about it for The Story Continues. And one of the things I talked about is that the film does this really amazing job of dropping people in the middle of scenes. So there's a scene where the guy's playing guitar, in the wherever the dormitory or whatever it is, it's a sorority house, and it's just sort of in the middle of the action. And there's a lot of scenes like that where you don't really know what's going on, and it's almost like you're walking through a house and just catching specific scenes. And it's got really interesting people in it that don't really exist in real life. It's got that really aggressive, I don't know if she's Australian, maybe, woman in Flashdance outfit. That's I wonder what he dreams of. And she's asking for her Chanel number 9 while she's eating stew. And it's because I want that smell of stew number 9 to, over. And it's almost like it was made in another world, the film. Like none of it makes sense, and it's amazing. And it's got that girl doing that song at the end where she's going crazy and she's singing, and it makes me think of like Curly singing. It's like la da dee, la da da. It's like I don't understand this film, but it's amazing. I watch it all the time. It's a really great fun film. I don't think it's particularly anything in terms of like violence or scares. There's nothing in it that works really as a horror film, but it works as just a really quality piece of entertainment when you just want to just live on another planet for 90 minutes. I think this is a great film for that.
Amanda hit the nail on the head. One of my favorite things in slasher movies are when they have just like zany characters where you're like, who is this person? They don't exist in reality. I remember in the mid 80s watching movies like Killer Party and being like, in the future, people are going to think that people like looked like this, but they don't look like this right now. Like, who are these people? To all a good night. I have not been able to find any actual ad mats or evidence that it played theatrically in January of 1980. I don't think it did. I think it's like more of a movie that got seen on home video. David Hess. It still fascinates me that David Hess directed this. Of course, David Hess is like Marlon Brando to people like me. And, I just adore him as an on-screen presence, but you don't really think of him as a director. But, I think it holds up well. And I think, it's great that there's so many like Christmas slasher movies to give those of us non-traditional types something to do in that time of the year. And we can always have our Christmas-themed horror movie marathons. I'm sure many of you do. Between the kills, right? Something has to sustain your interest, and I think the slower slasher films, like something like The Final Terror, is like the characters aren't as exciting as in a movie like Sleepaway Camp or Bloody Birthday.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think the reason why that film works is because the characters are so memorable. You don't forget how weird they are. It's just like this sorority does not make sense at all in this movie. And the fact that it's a Christmas movie that doesn't really feel like Christmas intrigues me. I don't understand the process behind that. But yeah, I agree with that. I agree that the kills are not the focus of this movie. I think the characters are the focus of this movie, and just the reveal is weird, and the ending is weird. It's a vibe. I call it's a vibe.
It is a vibe.
And I do watch it every December.
Like a very like part where he's like the pilot of the plane, and you wouldn't even know it was Harry unless you saw the credits.
Right. We ended up doing like a triple feature of Alex Rebar scripted movies because we watched Demented, we watched Terror on Tour, and we watched To All a Good Night. And I was like, what is happening right now? But yeah, to see porn star Harry Reams show up in Demented and then show up as the pilot.
It's so random.
Really, he's like
Demented, when it has that zoom in title with the little graphic, I'm in. Like that reels me in every time. I just adore that movie, and very, very underseen movie in its own right.
Agreed. Fraser, how about you? To All Good Night.
You know what I love about this genre as a whole is that, and love talking to all of you wonderful folks about it, is that different people can get so many different things. I struggled to get a whole lot out of this particular one, so I am not going to yuck anyone's yum here, and I appreciate everyone's passion that has spoken so far about it. For me, I had a hard time finding the nonsensicalness to be anything more than nonsensicalness, but I see what you all are saying, and it's now given me some different bites on it.
Adam?
I have nothing to add about the film, but apropos of nothing, I will say that one of the fun things about watching it again is I think we all agree that we've lost something in that we don't go to the video store anymore and find these, quote unquote classics on tape, or we stay up till 4 a.m. to catch them on cable. But the one good thing about today, is the quality of the films on streaming. And when I saw To All a Good Night for the first time, it was on a friend's VHS tape that was dubbed. So it wasn't even the media home video. It was just, a copy of a copy, and you couldn't even see it. It just looked terrible. And so many of these films I'm prejudiced, against against, because when I saw them the first time, they were unwatchable. And now when you see them on a streaming service, really, I mean, some of them are still, awful looking, but some have been really cleaned up. And it's like watching them for the first time. And it's really just, absolutely amazing to go back and watch these films, because some of them should get more credit than they do, just because they looked so terrible physically when they came out.
That was kind of the case with Terror on Tour. I couldn't find that anywhere.
Yeah.
I had to watch I had to watch the YouTube version,
Mhm.
and it was rough on many levels.
Yeah.
I didn't. One. I like the clown.
No, I was going to say, I actually had more fun with it than I was expecting to. I was like, okay, so we have, kind of like a rock and roll band, kind of a Kiss knockoff called The Clowns. There's no real suspense as to who the killer is. You're like, well, it's obviously that guy because everybody else is on stage.
I'll say that it has a great premise. I'll give it that.
Well, Terror on Tour was directed by Don Edmonds, who directed Ilsa, which, of course, talk about a rom-com classic. But I interviewed Don Edmonds in 2004. Really the nicest guy, an odd character. But that movie, there was like a phone call made to Don Edmonds from Sandy Coe, and there were two movies, these two 5-day movies. One was produced by him, which was later retitled as Home Sweet Home. It's originally called Thanksgiving Day Massacre. And then he directed Terror on Tour. The band's real name is The Names, I think.
Yeah.
But they really had a lot to do creatively with the movie itself. Don Edmonds was just all about, like, in this particular movie, just getting it done extremely quickly. They had access to the Wilshire Theater for just a certain amount of time, and the movie had to be shot in those days. But I think it holds up nicely. I think it's a fun one, and definitely talk about oddball characters. That of all these movies, I think is maybe the might be the only one that hasn't been restored on DVD or Blu-ray. So we would love to see
and
that happen.
And I think I could be wrong, but I think it's the only one that exclusively kills women of all of these movies that we saw.
There's actually a lot of, not a lot, but there's been some studies on violence against women in the slasher films. And so I don't know if anybody here knows Hysteria Lives website, but, Justin Kurzweil, who I do a lot of commentaries with, he split up the kills on all of his horror movie reviews, and somebody went through and added them up, and it turns out more men get killed than women in slasher films. And but papers have been written about how they die, and women tend to die more with having longer periods of being afraid, and the deaths are more graphic, whereas the men will either die off screen or it's a much shorter kill scene, which I thought was interesting. So there's been a lot of theorizing about it, but it is actually a misnomer that women get killed more so than men in slashers. And you can argue it one way or the other, but it is kind of an interesting idea that most people go into these thinking that they're really misogynistic, and I find myself telling them that usually they're not. I mean, there's a couple that definitely you can't argue that, but they're really not. And I think The Final Girl is one element of it that you can defend, but I think there's all kinds of elements in it that make these films sort of female centric too.
And then there's a couple of don't films that were early on. Don't Answer the Phone is a darker, grittier, half cop story, half murder story. There's no real slashing, it's more of a strangling, and we have a great central performance from Nicholas Worth. But thoughts on Don't Answer the Phone?
It's interesting that like you said, it's more of the strangle than the slasher, and I think that is what he's credited, right? The character is just the strangler. That one, to me, again, in talking about how the genre solidified, there's an interesting distinction that I can't fully articulate all the way between like a serial killer and a slasher. This guy is a serial killer, right? The guy in Maniac's a serial killer, right? And there is something, and obviously Jason like technically is a serial killer, but like that's not the term that I'm going to use to describe Jason or Michael Myers or like any of those type of like traditional like slasher guys. This guy felt much more just like, and maybe that's the rooted in reality, maybe that's the cop aspect, maybe it's that he's those different pieces, but this felt a lot more in line with Seven and that kind of world of things. I liked it. I thought it was good. His performance is great. Those scenes of him like like doing the workouts with the weird music and the weird lighting and stuff were very effective and very creepy. So it's it's a rundown film, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it feels very Thomas Harris in that regard.
Yeah, totally.
It's a personal favorite. It's certainly a tier 1 slasher in my mind. I love Don't Answer the Phone. Watching it as a kid, it did seem a bit sleazy. I think that it's interesting to consider serial killer type movies as a subset of slasher movies or vice versa. Maniac, Don't Answer the Phone feel different than a straight stalk and slash movie. And again, when you watch these movies all in a row, Flo Garish appears in Schizoid, and you're like, I just saw her yesterday. But no, she I got to do a Q&A with her at Cinema Wasteland just recently in October of 2021, and she's back. She's in she was in the Oscar nominated movie Mank, and she's in Tom Six's, the guy who made The Human Centipede. He cannot get, for the life of him, distribution of his latest movie, but she's back. If you're interested in Flo Garish, now known as Flo Lawrence, Don't Answer the Phone. I think the knee-jerk reaction to media critic types, because there's a misogynistic character, then the movie itself is misogynistic. I think that's a pretty myopic way of looking at things. That type of criticism, it's all fun and games and academics until it results in real life censorship, like the video nasties in the UK. And to this day, people couldn't, the average person, even our allies on the left, couldn't care less about censorship of low art. You tell people that certain movies are still banned in England, they couldn't care less because it's not high art, it's low art.
Well, something you just said, I mean, I think as a younger viewer, we kind of take those reviews that we read and they get filed away as this is a sleazy, it's not well done, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that kind of colors our view of the film, because I know that was kind of what I thought about this movie until this most recent viewing. I thought it was, that's that sleazy, not well done, over the top performances, et cetera. And as I watched it this time, like either that little, circuit has burned out and I don't watch films the same way anymore. I enjoyed this one on a different level than I had in the past. And I was thankful for the opportunity to revisit it. I didn't put this on the list, but I just saw that Don't Go in the House was around the same time. If people have just quick thoughts on that one.
Oh, that's it. It's great. I think that's a great film.
And it's not a slasher by what we consider normal terms, because there's no slashing going on. It's somebody who, uses basically an incinerator as their murder weapon.
I went to the house that they made that at, and I saw the film there.
Fuck yeah.
Wow.
Mark did that too.
Jealous.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really neat. And you get to tour the house afterwards. That's a really interesting.
Where is it, Amanda?
It's in New Jersey somewhere. My friend took me when I was in New York, and they every Halloween they raise money for because it's a historical landmark. So they raise money by having screenings, and only a few people can sit in there because you're just sitting in the living room. And it's actually a really small house that's actually really close to other houses. And the way they shot it, it doesn't look like that. But I held off on watching that one because I thought I was going to really hate it. I was surprised at how engaging it was. It's just a really well-made kind of character study film.
Yeah.
And the scenes of violence against the women weren't as awful as I thought they were going to be. I don't know that they do light women on fire in it, but it doesn't feel like it's super awful. Like I didn't squirm when I watched it, but overall I think and I don't know the name of the actor, but the lead guy's performance is very good in that.
I think those scenes though in the incinerator are extremely effective. I was like, I don't even know how they did that. That looks great. Like it's a really, really effective sequence.
Unlike Amanda, those scenes actually bothered me. That's one of the few films, even more than I Spit or Last House on the Left, really stuck with me after watching that movie. There was something upsetting about it.
Yeah, no, this movie fills me with glee and doesn't upset me in the slightest. But that was supposed to make everyone laugh, but it didn't.
No, we're all just,
you're like, Art's being a dick again. But next weekend in my hometown, I'm introducing a theatrical double bill of Last House on Dead End Street, which I'm incredibly familiar with, and Don't Go in the House, which I'm much less familiar with. So I just rewatched it for that reason, and it definitely does fall into, as Amanda said, kind of character study. type serial killer movies, sort of like Maniac or Don't Answer the Phone, or maybe even Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. One of the things that I think is really endearing about it is just like we see in a lot of these movies, including Funeral Home, is like nods to Psycho with the dead mom. This maybe is one of the like cornier nods to Psycho. I thought it was a laugh riot. I enjoyed the hell out of it, and
I think you're a laugh riot, Art.
Definitely. Spoiler alert: they go in the house. I mean, like it's.
There are two that came up next. Dressed to Kill, Brian De Palma's, which I think sometimes gets kind of lumped in with slashers, although it's certainly a much higher end slasher.
Yeah.
And then Prom Night came out around the same time over the summer. And I'd like to kind of talk about Prom Night and Terror Train in the same breath, just because they are, the Jamie Lee Curtis connection and the Canadian connection.
You could actually talk about Prom Night, just off the top of my head, and Dress to Kill together in a way, because I guess I'll spoil it because it's old enough now. But the whole point about that. So Prom Night's one of my all-time favorite movies, and I've written about it extensively. Like, it was my senior thesis paper in college, was about He Knows You're Alone and Prom Night. But the thing about Prom Night is that Alex, the killer in the film, is becoming his sister, right? And you see he's wearing lipstick at the end of the film when she takes off the mask. Jamie Lee Curtis, who is the sister of Alex, Kim Hammond. And so you could sort of talk about that idea of like, because Michael Caine's character, and I didn't rewatch Dress to Kill, so it's been a while since I've seen it, but he's, the transgendered, or I don't know what the word is for that, what he's doing, the cross-dressing aspects of it. It would be interesting to talk to somebody now who's young, who's seen that movie. I'm sure they would have a different viewpoint about it, maybe, about the character. But I guess when I think about those two together, you can't actually match them up as sort of thrillers. So, Prom Night was made to be a thriller, and it wasn't supposed to have as many of the slasher elements that it had. But then the producer came in and he was like, we need more of something. And they sort of rearranged it. But it was meant to be more in line of like a Dress to Kill than a Terror Train, I think. So they actually do have a couple of similarities. But Prom Night is like just a great film. And that is a film. So when we talk about, like, Art says he doesn't psychoanalyze his films or himself anymore. I mean, I analyze the shit out of everything. But like Prom Night to me is like a movie that's completely about grief and loss, and what grief and loss does, not to just the killer in the film, but to the family in the film. And not only that, but it's got this really interesting aspect of like, how could these people be involved in the death of this little girl, and then 6 years later they're her best friend of the older sister, and they're acting like nothing ever happened, and she's dating one of them, and they all have this big secret. And so the movie is sort of metaphorical for like coming of age, like what happens when you were sort of like this innocent youth that had this great life. She's the object of all the men's fantasies, and she's got these great friends. And then you find out that they were responsible for your sister's death, and it drove your brother nuts and made your mom almost like a mute. You wake up to this kind of real world that people aren't always what you think they're going to be. And the kids are so like vanilla, but they're also really evil at the same time for what they did, in the way that they don't seem to have any guilt over it, with the exception of the boyfriend and Wendy. I could argue about the bad girl in the film being actually the good girl, but like, this movie has so many layers to it, and I don't think much of it was intentional, but it kind of works. And the more I watch the film, the more I see it as like this really great movie that has a lot of meaning to it, and it really helps me understand loss. It articulates loss in a way, horror articulates loss in general in a way that you can't articulate in another genre. But that film in particular, this and The Toolbox Murders articulate loss in ways that are like I've never seen before, and are probably really descriptive to what repression of grief feels like. It feels like you go mad, and then it explodes. And for Alex, it explodes in this way that he has to like kill these people for what they did. And so it's a really fascinating film, and it's also moving. And I think it's incredible, and I could talk about it for 3 days, so I'll stop there. But I think it's a really, really great film.
Thank you, Amanda. Anybody else?
I agree with the point about the grief and the loss, and how it's about that. I was really struck by that on this. I've seen it a number of times before, but on this particular viewing, there is always going to be a bit of a stigma that goes with slasher movies and horror movies, even more broadly, around like acting and bad performances and things like that. And I think we all here would agree that that is nonsense, and there's great performances in horror movies all the time, but there's great performances, and then there's like great performances. And Jamie Lee is she is spectacular, and that at the end, I was really struck this time by just the very, very ending of just like the loss for this character of like how much has been taken from her, and like she and that really comes through in her performance and just like the way she carries herself and her face and her body and everything, of just the real crushing loss. But at the same time, what makes it great is that that's absolutely there, but the movie is a blast. I already talked about the dancing scene, which is great, but like the head coming off and rolling down, and the so many of the kills, it's a really fun movie. And then the one last thing I'll say about it too, because like Amanda, I could talk about it for a while, but I was struck this time as well by what an interesting job they do of going with the red herrings. There's a lot of killer red herrings in here, ones that make no sense. Like there's plenty of red herrings that they throw out that you're like, well, wait, it's definitively not that guy. Like 100% not that guy. So I don't know why you're trying to convince me it's that guy, because I know it's not. But they do it. They really lean into that, which is fun. I enjoy that aspect of it, especially with Leslie Nielsen. They really want you to think it's Leslie.
That's right. Yeah.
Adam?
Sounds like I'm going to try to be a contrarian, but I'm really not. But the truth is, out of all these Prom Night is the quintessential slasher film, I guess. But for whatever reason, growing up and even nowadays, it's not one of my favorites. It's actually one of the ones that I like least of all. And I have no idea why, because it has all the elements. It really does. And it has all the elements as we would expect to see him, and all the elements that I love in so many other films. But for some reason, and I felt this again when I rewatched it, I just like Bloody Valentine, Happy Birthday to Me, The Burning. I like those. To me are so much more fun than Prom Night for whatever reason. And it might be because, what Amanda articulated so well about those heavy themes. It's not just like a light, frivolous movie. But, for what it's worth, it was never one of my favorites. Great movie, well made, and I can see why people love it. But it just, to me, it wasn't as fun as the others.
So I would kind of go along with that for me personally, because I was watching it again and going, there's a reason why I don't come back to this one often enough.
Right.
It just doesn't have the quirky energy for me.
Right.
However, I had completely forgotten about the van scene and Slick. And I'm like, why don't I see, like, I just want that movie right there where, because Slick driving in that van and like trying to run the guy over, and the just crazy mayhem. I was like, I had completely forgotten about that. And I'm so glad I went back to it just for that alone, because it was such a joy.
Slick is a god. But that's another element of that film that I find so interesting too, is that, so if you're watching it like I am, and you're seeing like the group of kids that were responsible for the murder at the beginning as being kind of evil, then the killer's not evil. Like the killer's not the bad guy. It's these people. But Slick and Lou is like the bully in the movie. Slick and Lou are completely innocent. They're marginalized characters because one's a drug dealer and one's a bully, but they actually didn't have anything to do with the original scene.
Right.
So when they get killed, they actually elicit more sympathy from me than the other characters in the film, which I find so fascinating too, that they took the two villains and you actually like them more.
There's no retribution for them because they didn't do anything.
Right.
Freddie?
I agree with Adam. It's one of those films I watched as a kid and I loved it. And as I get older, I kind of like it less and less. But I do agree with Amanda. The themes are very strong. I love that final act. When the prom scene I think is great. The dance scene, then you get to the killing, the stalking and killing. The scene at the end is very heartbreaking. Jamie Lee Curtis sells the hell out of that. But yeah, I just never really found it could be a fun movie to watch. I feel like it's very bleak. It's one of those films you gotta really be in the mood to watch. Like I've suffered a lot of loss in my life, so for me, it's not a fun experience, to be honest. But I understand the concept. I think watch Leslie Nielsen in a very serious role is very intriguing. So I recommend the film just for that. But for me, it's like mid-tier. But it's not like one of my favorite. It's way better than the remake. I'll give it that. So.
What remake?
Yeah, it doesn't exist. Right. I don't know what you're talking about.
Art, anything you want to throw in?
Yeah, I think what Freddie's getting at is how I always viewed Prom Night, which is until my most recent watch of it, I always thought of it as I don't want to say badly paced, but oddly paced, because you have the slam bang beginning, the slam bang end, and like you're either going to engage with the middle or you're not. Now, going to what in the very beginning, Amanda and Adam were talking about, which is when you're prepubescent and you're watching these movies. It is kind of exciting thinking about what young adulthood will have in store for you. What's a bigger rite of passage than prom, right? I mean, and so that definitely is something. I actually distinctly remember watching this movie at in middle school, being like, am I even going to have a girlfriend when I'm that age? Am I going to get to go to prom? And is that going to be something I want to do? Is it cool? Is it not cool? Like, I don't know, but yeah, no, that's I said to Alana when we first started watching it a day or two ago, I was like, well, I remember the van. I know the van. I was really into it this time around. So maybe I had unfair, and I think it does kind of go to like when you watch a whole bunch of these at once, and so it's like if I'm seeing Prom Night for the first time, the same time I'm seeing I've mentioned it earlier in this, but I'm going to probably mention it a few more times. Something excellent like Bloody Birthday. Like Bloody Birthday is going to be the movie I'm thinking about later in the week, not Prom Night. But it's an extremely well made movie, and yeah, that dance number, count me in. So.
Well, and another really well made Canadian film is Terror Train. Came out later that same year. Also starring Jamie Lee Curtis, directed by Roger Spottiswoode, who would go on to have a pretty successful Hollywood career. That movie looks amazing. Cinematographer John Alcott worked with Kubrick a couple of times. And I mean, it's such a great looking movie. And then you got the weirdo, addition of David Copperfield doing close-up magic. I don't know how you're doing that. Okay, that's cool. The magic is like the van scene for me now, where I'm like, you don't need that in this movie, but it's nice to have.
Inside baseball, when I interviewed Spottiswoode, he told me one of his biggest regrets was the magic aspect of it, because he worked so hard in finding Copperfield and doing magic for real, or quote unquote for real, on camera, thinking audiences were going to just be blown away by it. But the ironic thing is, because it's a movie, they just assume it's all trickery anyway. So nobody cared at all about the magic, and he was disappointed because he worked really hard to put that at the forefront of it.
Yeah, I'm one of the few that actually prefers Terror Train over Prom Night. I just think it's a more interesting movie.
Okay. Me too.
I think the killer just changing costumes throughout is very cool. Jamie Lee Curtis is again great in the movie. Film looks fantastic. I think the pace is very well done. I actually like David Copperfield in this movie. It's just an odd fit, but I think it's what makes it memorable. And I think that killer reveal is, when I first watched that, I did not get that reveal at all. I was like, oh my God, the killer was there the whole time and we didn't even know it. But yeah, I think it's one of my favorite slasher films of 1980.
It's got a lot of energy. It's got a lot of really likable and unlikable. Like Doc isn't particularly likable, but Hart Bochner is such a great actor. You can't take your eyes off him. Great. He's so good in it. And of course, Jamie Lee Curtis is really great. And I like all the characters in it. It's just fun. It's like a party film. It's something you can really just sit back and watch with like a group of friends. And it does have scary stuff. That first mask, the Harpo Marx. Is it Harpo Marx?
Yeah.
It's
Groucho
Marx.
Or I'm sorry, Groucho. Or Gene Siskel, right? Not Gene Siskel. Who's that? Gene Shalit.
Gene Shalit.
That's who I was thinking when I said but it's really scary because the way they shoot him and he looks at people, like the eyes and are very, it's so good. Yeah, that's a really, really fun one.
It's got some good stuff in it. I prefer Prom Night, but I do like this one as well. I like the scene a lot towards the end where she's locks herself in the little sort of cubicle, which is a terrible,
as far as escape tactics go.
bad all around, but it leads to a really good, very Halloween, really leans into the Halloween aspect there for sure.
Right.
But hey, if you're going to steal from something, stealing that scene from Halloween and recreating it is not the worst idea in the world. So I enjoy that scene quite a bit.
So there was this delay in Terror Train being released on VHS. And so if you were a VHS era movie nerd, as I was, and you were watching every slasher movie you could get your hands on, Terror Train wasn't available on VHS until 1988. I had waited and waited to see Terror Train, and when it finally was released, I was a little bit disappointed. I felt kind of like I felt with Prom Night, that it wasn't paced very well. I don't know what the hell was wrong with me. It's an extraordinarily well-paced movie, and like Freddie, I like David Copperfield in it, and I can't really it is goofy, right, to have magic tricks in a movie, right? Because and we call it movie magic for a reason, right? You know, I could be flying right now. The Canadian element is also pretty interesting. And I think I have to be on the very short list of people who really, really very much enjoyed the Terror Train remake and its sequel. So
I
liked it too. I liked it too.
yeah, they were fun, right?
On Tubi, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good cast. Like they have like some like really like fun kids and like who have a good sense of humor about them. They're fun, yeah.
I'll just say one weird thing. I couldn't sleep last night well, and I was waking up, and I read this interview with Derek McKinnon, who plays the victim, and I'd never heard this story before. And it turns out that there was a whole scene between him playing the assistant and kissing Ben Johnson. And Ben Johnson, who I assume is straight, really wanted to have the scene where they kiss. And Derek McKinnon, who's out and gay, but wasn't at the time, got real angry about it and didn't want to do it. So, again, this really has nothing to do with anything, but it's just this one that a bizarre story about what went on behind the scenes of the of this film.
Well, and Ben Johnson apparently people were like, why are you this seasoned award-winning actor? Why are you doing this crappy little film? He's like, because Roger Spottiswoode is doing it, and he had worked with Spottiswoode or knew of Spottiswoode's work with the Peckinpah films, Straw Dogs and Getaway, and so he's like, of course I'm going to do Spottiswoode's film. But yeah, I think it's a really well-polished film. Another kind of big star that came out of this next film was He Knows You're Alone, which is lauded for being Tom Hanks's film debut.
I can talk about He Knows You're Alone for 6 days, so I'll just start. And it's just like one of the greatest freaking movies of all time. So it's an interesting movie because it really got like ripped apart because it does have a lot of elements like Halloween, including the music in particular. And I mean the general setup, I guess, but this movie sticks out for me on your list of all the films because what I talked about earlier is I like to watch the female characters interact with each other. And this movie has a really strong bond of three women, who come to help each other out through different elements in the film. And it's also a really great metaphor for how women are treated in the world because the main character, Amy's going to get married and she's getting cold feet. And so she starts seeing this guy following her around and she tells people and everybody thinks it's just her cold feet. And her local priest puts her down. Nobody's paying attention to her, but her female friends do, including the one who breaks a date with Tom Hanks to spend the night with her to make her feel better, right? And so also the slut character tells Amy at one point, she says, you don't have to get married. You can do whatever you want. And of course, her fiance wants her to quit school, become a housewife. Like there's all these things that are happening in this film and it's just so layered. And it's a really intelligent film. The script consultant, who I don't think had a lot of influence on the film in and of itself, was Veridika, who would go on to write a book called Games of Terror, which predates Men, Women, and Chainsaws, and kind of deals with the slasher aspects of those films. And she's brilliant. And there's something about that movie that vibes with me as a woman watching these films, where I feel like they really cared about the women characters to the degree that like they just spent a lot of time with them. A lot of the film is spent with these women just being with each other and being friends. And so I love the horror aspects of it. I love the killer. I think he's really great. He's not masked, and he's scary and it's got a great background for him. And I like Amy's other love interest played by Don Scardino. He's really fun. He's like this going to be a mortician and he's really funny and adorable. And
he was in Squirm, so he's inherently on my love list.
He's great, yeah. And it's interesting because her fiance was in Girls' Night Out, and he's also, I mean, it's just cute boys galore. Let's face it, there's all kinds of cute boys, but it's just such a great film, and I watch it over and over and over again, and I never get tired of it, and I think it's got everything that I want from a film, and that's what I want. I want characters I really care about. I want really good stalk and chase scenes and murder scenes. And I like having a really good backstory for the killer. And I like that just being in 1980 in and of itself, the fashion is great. Like aesthetically, it's really beautiful to look at. It captures fall really well. It might be a Christmas film, but everything's dead, outside, like all the trees and everything, and it's really like moody that way. It's fantastic.
Incredible film. You definitely pointed out a lot of its best qualities, and rewatching it this time, certainly of the three that I rewatched from start to finish, it was by far the best. I don't understand the scene where the three girls encounter the professor with his wife on the street,
Okay.
and he acts like he doesn't know them. Afterwards, it's just like hilarious to all three of them. Like none of them are like, "What a prick," or like, no one's mad about it. It's just like the funniest thing ever. And then the scene where she's with him in his house, and he like traps her in the window, and
That's
it's
right.
like it's so odd, and it's like you said, the zany characters, and you have to have something besides the horror elements to sustain the remainder of these movies. And this movie does it as well or better than any. Really a strong movie, and a movie that like I need to reconsider, and maybe stop considering it a tier 2 slasher. It really is probably a tier 1. It's excellent.
Well, I think Patsy Peace's character, and I can't remember the character's name, she's a really liberated character too, because you're right, she doesn't get upset. She's having this affair, and that's questionable. And she's supposed to be like, when she dies, Freddie talks about the morality play. She's
Right.
being punished for what she's done,
Right,
right?
right.
So is he. It's funny that you say that, because I remember exactly what she says. They all walk. He walks away with his wife, and then she's just laughing, and she's like, "I'm gonna bust his balls," and and it's just hilarious, right? But what I like about her is that she is so liberated, that she offers options. So like, you can look at it as a morality play, but you could also look at it as like a character who does all these things, but at the same time presents this idea that you don't have to be this housewife at 20 years old. You can be something else and enjoy your life. She was very happy being the person she was.
Right.
Very comfortable in those shoes. And so I find her as like a really liberated character. And even though she's punished, I think it's the moments before that are really important to me. I don't think so much about the punishment as I think about the freedom of her character.
I think Armin Mastroianni is one of the most underrated directors, maybe in all of horror. I mean, this whole movie, I love it. From the opening scene, the hook, to the movie theater scene, to the girl hanging out the window, to the amusement park scene when it's not the tilt-a-whirl, whatever that ride is, coming closer to the killer, and then he's not there. You can tell watching this that this is a real filmmaker with a capital F. This is not some schmo who wanted to make a cheesy horror film. This is an unbelievably talented director who we're watching coming of age. I love everything about the film, and I wish it did better. And the only reason I think maybe it didn't, aside from shoddy distribution, is because of the age of the characters. It was not the typical slasher film in high school or college. These were adults already, and maybe that could have alienated the target audience. I don't know, but I wish more people would appreciate this, because it's a fantastic film.
Yeah, you have a great section on it in Going to Pieces, so highly recommend.
It was actually a modest box office hit, is my understanding.
Yeah, we're watching this for this panel. I liked it a lot more than I did before, because before I just saw like a Halloween ripoff, because a lot of the scenes are Halloween, the music's very Halloween. But like you really understand the themes of the movie, where she's like in fear because this idea of getting married is a very scary thing. So like all these things are happening. So people think she's paranoid, and it's really like this guy just stalking her. This guy, I love the concept of this guy just killing brides. I think that's just a very interesting thing. Something that could probably really happen in real life, to be honest with you. And yeah, I agree with Amanda about the Patsy Peace character. I thought she was the best character in the movie, because she's just so very liberated. She knows who she is. She doesn't care about relationships in that way that most women do. She's a very modern character, I think, and I feel like if you put her in a horror movie now, she'd probably survive. So it's very interesting to watch it now, going like, yeah, she wouldn't be like the first one to be killed. She'd be like probably the final girl, to be honest with you.
Yeah, to Adam's point about it being, a filmmaker making it, right? Probably my favorite thing in movies, period, not just horror movies, but just the thing that will always grab me in movies is when films have the sort of courage to just come to a dead halt and let a song play, whether it's, in various ways, whether it's just on the soundtrack or whether it's live in the movie. I'm a big fan of music in movies, musical numbers. I already talked about Prom Night being my favorite part of this entire thing, and that's like a great example of it. But this also has such a great example of it with the I believe it's the Tom Hanks love interest one, right? Who, you know, she's listening to the music, and it's got this just great atmosphere. And the killer doesn't even come in for it's a patient scene. It takes a little bit for him to come in, and then it's not, you know, this explicitly violent. Well, you don't see a ton of it, but just the patience to just be like, we're bringing it to a dead halt while this song plays and while the camera kind of moves and while we sit in this moment is really great. And that's the moment that most stuck out to me. That and Tom Hanks, you see why he became who he became, because boy, is he good.
Great.
If I was the casting director watching that movie, I would 100% be like, that guy, give me that guy, get that guy in anything that I am in charge of.
The next two, actually, I think somebody chatted about it earlier, the idea that Mother's Day and Funeral Home are not ones that we would necessarily categorize as slashers, and yet I have seen them talked about as slashers. I think the guys on Discover the Horror recently showcased it as one of the examples of their slashers. So Mother's Day.
That's another one with 3 really vibrant leads. That's a brutal film. It's really hard to watch. It's not one I can revisit often because of the rape scene, because it's so long and it's really, she gets really degraded in it. But I have a lot of sympathy for her, you know, like it doesn't turn me off to sit through sexual violence in films sometimes, and sometimes it does. That one doesn't hit a trigger for me. But I really like the film because I think of the women in it. And I like Ike and Adley a lot. Like as bad guys, they're really fun to watch, you know. Maybe that's part of the reason why I can watch the film too, because despite that really dark moment, it's kind of just a weird chase film, and with these crazy hillbilly stereotypes. But I think it's a really effective film. And I remember I showed that movie to a girlfriend of mine like sometime in the 90s, and it's got that jump scare at the end, and to this day she's like, Queenie. She's always talking about the woman like that jumps out at the end, and like it really stuck with her. But I think it's not a perfect film or anything like that, but I think it's really good, and I think it's carried really well by like the actresses in particular. I just like all of them.
Mother's Day's got that trauma energy, right? Which is a very distinct kind of thing, right? Yeah. The good, like you said, the crazy zany redneck characters. But then, right, it does have that. It's interesting. It's going along like that for a long time, and then it does get into like, now we're in the kind of what I was talking about before with that sort of mean category as well. So I enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. I liked it. It was one of my favorites of the ones we watched. But it is this weird juxtaposition of both, like a sort of complex piece of both the like, that's just silly, and like, oh, that's awful. And the two of them together is a little odd.
I think it's fun to mix confrontational cinema with humorous cinema, and I think it makes the sexual violence in Mother's Day all the grosser, right? Like, because you have this goofy movie, you're like, wait a minute, is this movie supposed to be funny? And now there's a rape scene, and I'm like, who's the target audience for this? Art Ettinger? Like, who the fuck would have a good time with Mother's Day? What kind of sick fuck would think that this is?
Yeah, I know, I'm like,
but no, it's like, you know, the punk sucks, disco stupid. I love Mother's Day. I never really thought of it as a slasher movie. It is a slasher era movie for sure, and was marketed as such.
I think a lot of it is it gets lumped in with the holiday aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like we get Halloween, and we get, you know, Christmas, and then we get Mother's Day, and I think that's how it's it's gotten mothered in as a slasher film, even though it is not a slasher film in my mind at all.
It has slasher elements though, like from the beginning chase, murder to, I mean, it definitely has slasher elements.
Freddie?
Yeah, I don't consider it a slasher movie either. It's more of an exploitation movie to me.
Sure.
But yeah, I like the quirkiness of it. I think it's just it's very well acted. For a trauma film, it's very well acted, to be honest. I'm enjoying this movie until that part happens. I go, why did you do this? But I think it's one of the better films that we watched for this episode. So
It's a well done film. Charles Kaufman, he actually is a real filmmaker too. I mean, you could tell there's some talent there. I don't enjoy the film. The rape scene's very uncomfortable. To me, it's not a slasher film. It's in the tradition of Last House or I Spit or even Texas Chainsaw movies like that. It's as Freddie said, it is absolutely a perfect example of exploitation cinema.
And Funeral Home. Funeral Home's another Canadian effort. I don't think that one's a slasher at all until it is. Like the last 20 minutes, I was like, oh, now it's a slasher movie. Thoughts on Funeral Home?
Very quick. Moved to someone else. Watched it last night. Print was terrible. Film was terrible. I have nothing to say or add. I'm glad it's out there. For me, I hadn't seen it in so long. Nothing stands out. Nothing was fun. Sorry.
I think it's on Shudder. So come back around to it.
yeah,
Okay.
Fraser.
Yeah, it didn't really stick out to me. A good performance from the main woman.
The grandma or the
grandma
girl?
who eventually. Yeah, I liked her performance quite a bit. I forget the actress's name off the top of my head.
Kay Haughty.
I said earlier in this, I like those moments when something really like pops and really comes through and really hits. And this one just didn't really have a lot of those moments for me. There wasn't a lot that really stuck out for me personally. As like, yeah, there we go. I'm gonna often think about that moment.
Freddie.
yeah. This is the first time I actually watched this movie, and I just was like, it's a Psycho ripoff,
Yeah.
The killer was like obvious from the moment the voices happens. Okay, this is what we're doing. Okay,
Right.
I agree with the performance of the main character. She was great, but this film really didn't do much for me, to be honest with you.
Well, and I also like Leslie Donaldson, who plays the
granddaughter.
Granddaughter.
Mhm.
I think that I think most of the performances are pretty solid, and I do like the relationships. Again, I don't think it's a slasher movie until Kay Haughty goes off the deep end. Art or Amanda?
I like it. I like Leslie Donaldson quite a bit, but I only remember Mrs. Chalmers, the embalmer. It's got some Canadian actors in it that are very familiar. It's got a guy from Black Christmas, and it's got I think Al Humphreys might be in it from My Bloody Valentine as well. It's fun, but it's not one I see very often.
Funeral Home was interesting to revisit. It's a movie that really got kind of a second life. It opened in Canada in 1980, but it didn't open in the States as Funeral Home until June 4th of 1982. It really, most of us probably saw it on VHS. Leslie Donaldson is great, and she's about to appear at Cinema Wasteland, at the next Cinema Wasteland. She was in a lot of other Canadian tax shelter era movies, including Happy Birthday to Me, Deadly Eyes and Curtains. Ray Sager, the Wizard of Gore himself, was the first assistant director on this movie, which is a fun fact. But William Fruitt is an underrated director, and he is also kind of like the king of the Canadian tax shelter movie that had AKAs, because he made Death Weekend, which is also known as House by the Lake, Trapped, which is Baker County, USA, this movie. And then he went on to make other movies, including Spasms, Bedroom Eyes, Killer Party, and Blue Monkey. And he made a lot of cool little horror movies. The first time I ever remember having an in-person conversation with Amanda, she was talking about her love of Bedroom Eyes 2, and I'm like, this woman knows what she's talking about. I think we're gonna be friends. So, not directed by William Fruitt though. The sequel, he was too good for that.
It was someone famous, right?
It's someone good.
Yeah,
Chuck Vincent.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's an interesting movie because it carries over the same characters, but it has different actors playing them. And
You're right.
if you didn't see the first film, you'd be totally lost with the second film. But because I love the first film, the second film makes a lot more sense.
And then let's move forward to the end of the year with Christmas Evil and New Year's Evil, which came out within a few weeks of one another because they were seasonally timed. Let's talk about Christmas Evil first.
Christmas Evil didn't really get a theatrical release. It played one time on November 6, 1980, right here in Pittsburgh as You Better Watch Out. And the actual ad match just said sneak preview tonight. Didn't even get its name in it. It's a really cool movie as far as seasonal slashers go. And it has, I think, inarguably, it has a little bit of a more intricate plot than many of these movies. It's kind of a plot-heavy movie for a slasher. but just a really well-made, serious movie with an excellent cast and definitely a lot of seasonal flair.
It reminded me a bit of Fade to Black, which is another kind of like not more character study than slasher, but it also came out the same year, actually. But yes, Brandon Maggard's central performance is just phenomenal. But also Jeffrey DeMune as his brother, like there's a lot of real texture going on there between the dynamic between those two. And I think there's a real fanciful quality, but also it's really grounded in emotion.
That's a really interesting movie, and I interviewed Lewis Jackson years ago about it. He was actually friends with one of my writing teachers at UCLA, and one of the things he told me was that he spent like a decade just collecting the tchotchkes that he would end up using in the film. So he had this very long-term vision of the movie when he conceived it to when he made it. And I don't remember much else about the interview, but I remember that he spent just like a decade. He would run into Christmas things, and he had in mind how he would help build the character through like the art direction, and it's such an interesting film. And I don't know that Lewis Jackson really did much else outside of that, but it's such a great film that I'm surprised that he didn't, because he really nailed it on the head. He made like it's not a slasher. I don't think it's very light in the horror in general, or not the horror, but the violence. But in terms of making a really engaging film where you just sit with this crazy person and you really kind of like him and he's interesting, in this weird universe that he built, it's just so well done. It's probably, aside from Dressed to Kill, is probably like closest to the movies that you've mentioned that comes to being like an art film, And I feel like as the years have passed, maybe Lewis Jackson has gotten some redemption, and because people have really come to love it.
Freddie?
Yeah, it's a great character study. I love the ending to this movie. I always try to figure out what's going on. Is it real? Is it in his head? I just think that's fantastic. I think the performances are great. It's a very slow burn, because the first half is very slow until you get to the second half where it's like all the crazy stuff happens. But it's so well made. I've seen the remaster; it looks great. I mean, it's just a wonderful movie. People love Silent Night, Deadly Night, but I kind of feel like this one is the true Christmas horror.
This one is just a different animal. It's like I'd say Silent Night, Deadly Night is a slasher. It's a Christmas slasher. This one is less so. And there's an interesting kind of like bounce back and forth between like him doing good deeds at the hospital, and then him going and murdering in front of the church, and then he goes to the holiday party, and then gets stuck in the chimney, and it's like there's just like such these little wild little vignettes that are all leading up to that unforgettable ending. Fraser?
Yeah, no, I agree. It is such an interesting way that it puts all these different pieces together. I'll add to your list of vignettes the scene with the kids where they're defending him, right? All these great moments. And it is such a great choice to be able to be like, we're doing this character study. We're thinking we're, in this sort of more, like you said, like someone said, artsy kind of mode, but then he drives his van off the big bridge, and you're like, yeah, let's do this too. We can be both of these things. We can be artsy, and we can have this totally lunacy ending that like makes you be like, wait, whoa, hold on. I really enjoyed that aspect of it quite a bit. Not so much a slasher. I don't know if anybody knows this. I was curious. I meant to look it up and I forgot. It's got like, there's the one, very understandable, like his coworker that he kills, right? That he's got a sort of grudge against. But then there's also the like random people that he kills, because he gets frustrated, like the drunk folks. And I was curious. I don't know if anybody knows this. Like, was that something that was always in the script? It felt a little like, we need to buck up the kill count a little bit here, like give it a little bit of oomph in the middle. Because again, there is one central death that is very personal to him, and then there's these other kind of random ones.
Watched it recently, was surprised how much it felt more like 70s exploitation film than it did a traditional slasher, because there's so much the psychology of the film is so much more important than it would be in a traditional slasher.
Yeah.
For me, the thing that I can't get out of my mind is not the last scene with the bus. It's the opening scene with Santa and the woman.
Oh,
And
Oh, right.
I'm trying to say this in a funny way. What he's doing to her, I don't know, because he's eye level with the genitals, but he's just kind of staring, smelling, looking. But she's the whole thing was so weird, and that was as disturbing as anything else about the film for me.
yeah. I'm gonna play the art house card and say, well, I think that's the child's vision of it. That's not actually what's really happening.
Right,
Kid just
right.
can't make anything else out. It's like, oh yeah, that's he was just staring at her for a long time. It was really interesting. And then bringing it home on our final stroke of midnight with New Year's Evil.
I'll jump in there. I
Please.
absolutely love New Year's Evil so much. Holy moly. I love it so much. Again, I've talked about it. I love music in movies. This had such good music in it. I think it is a real loss that the horror movies over time lost their connection to like weird 80s new wave stuff, like the music playing here. I said I would talk about it lingered on in 1981 in Graduation Day. You've got that amazing,
Wow.
sequence with a very similar kind of band there. There's so much just weird stuff going on in New Year's Evil that works so well with the music, with the sun, with the sort of voice reminiscent of New York Ripper, with the fact that at one point he gets sidetracked by dealing with the biker gang. Like it's a wild ride that just goes all over the place, and I am here for it every inch of the way.
Yeah, it's such a weird movie. I watch it every New Year's Eve, but I don't know why. It's like so bad it's good, because it's just the performances are like all over. I don't like the lead character in this movie. I think she's an awful person. And I'm like, she does. I gotta understand why he wants to kill her. I get it.
Blaze.
Yeah. Was it boil your hair or spit out, boil your hair? She says at the beginning. It's just a weird line. Yeah, I love the music though. I think the music is great. I think it really dates the movie though. But I really like the music. I like the concept of the killer. He's killing on each time zone. The New Year's countdown. But I just don't think the execution totally works. But it's an odd duck. I do think it's a slasher film. I do think it's figuring it out by this point. What's going to eventually become a slasher film, but I just don't think it works from beginning to end.
I'm gonna go against Freddie here and say that Blaze is one of the great characters of slasher film. And I'll tell you why. We're talking about these older slasher film characters, right? And so Blaze is the only one in her family working, and she's supporting this guy who's off playing golf in Palm Springs. She says Richard, right, played by Kip Niven. And first of all, Roz Kelly's playing Blaze, and she was Pinky Tuscadero on Happy Days, and it was amazing. She was actually a photographer. She used to take pictures of like Jimi Hendrix and the Rolling Stones in concert and stuff. And you should look up her photography. She's really talented. But anyway, so she's basically supporting Richard so that he can wear his Fila sweats, and go golfing. And then I get it, her kid gets a part in a TV show, Battleship America, but like this is the big night, right, where her show might go into syndication, and he's just like pulling her this way, and Richard's pulling her that way, and I feel like she's supporting this family, a working woman, and they're treating her like shit. And so, like, to me, she's like a hero, in the film, and I think she's a great protagonist. And I love her, and I love that relationship she has with like the cop. They have like this almost sexual chemistry. There's a part where they kind of have this argument backstage, and it's like, oh, they're gonna do it so hard. This is amazing. And the music is great. The band that you hear the most in it is called Shadow, and they're real hard to find because that's such a generic name for the internet to really vet out for you. But it's got great music. I love Kip Niven too. He's great in it. And that part where you're talking about the New York Ripper, I never associated that, but it's interesting because he starts with the mouthpiece in his mouth, and then it's just kind of over here, and he's like, I'm evil, and he's like, oh, Phantom, and he's like, no, just evil, and it's like, okay. And so it's really great. And he wears that great mask at the end, the Laurel Hardy thing. And, it's got a lot of really great elements. I do agree with Freddie. It's not completely like, it's not a straight through. It's not like a perfect film by filmmaking standards, but in terms of like me just wanting to sit down and watch it every year.
Yes, it's a fun movie. Yeah,
It's really fun. Yeah, I really look forward to watching it. But I do think the older I get, the more I find that I'm in Blaze's corner, and that maybe Richard should have fallen off that building.
Yep. Well, you got your wish. Art and Adam.
I don't think anything has ever dated a movie more to a time period than a party at Eric Estrada's house.
Art.
I adore New Year's Evil. That's all I have to say. I fucking love New Year's Evil. Love everything about it.
Well, thank you all so much. This was a delightful conversation, and I enjoyed watching these this close together, and then knowing I was going to get to sit down and actually chat with some superheroes of horror. Thank you all so much for bringing your insights and enthusiasm, and looking forward to having you all on again very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.